The head of world football, Gianni Infantino, should quit over his failed plan to sell off a stake in the World Cup to private shareholders. Now, that call from the president of Spain's La Liga joins a reported growing list from both inside and outside world football's governing body, FIFA, wanting change at the top. Infantino's top advisor resigned in protest over the funding plan, which would have included investors linked to the family of US President Donald Trump. Already, Infantino is said to be under fire for the decision to lift a US player's suspension during the World Cup, that after a number of phone calls from Trump. UEFA, the governing body of European football, had threatened to boycott FIFA events, including the next World Cup, if Infantino did not back off of his investment plan. And I'm joined now from the UK by Adam Davis. He's a sports economist and a management consultant with the University Campus of Football Business in Manchester. That's a higher education campus focused on the football and sports industries. Adam, so good to have you on the programme. So tell us, first of all, your opinion on this. Can Gianni Infantino survive what is now being called the investors' affair?
It's certainly a very interesting situation. I think we have to go all the way back to what feels like a lifetime ago, but was in fact only Tuesday morning. Gianni Infantino was an incredibly secure position as head of FIFA as the head of FIFA, but it now seems progressively more under threat. You know, there's lots that's been made around his decision making, and more importantly, the backlash that has come off of his relationship and the backlash that's come from the sort of the members that's meant to sit beneath FIFA, really. This is obviously the likes of UEFA and the Asian Confederacy and CONMEBOL, which is the South American one. And actually, it's been a really, really interesting position and a really interesting time for Gianni Infantino in the last 5 days. Much has been made around his presidency, where he goes from here. And I think there's an awful lot that still needs to take place before we hit anything particularly concrete either.
Right. It's an interesting way of putting it, an interesting time for Gianni Infantino these days. Now, we've seen, of course, the explicit call for his resignation coming from the head of La Liga. Or also, you mentioned the noises coming from UEFA officials. They're not promising for Infantino. But is that just a Euro-centric view? Will other regional confederations be more forgiving?
There does seem to be a real change, and it's not a universal agreement from either of them. As you said, Javier Tebas, the head of La Liga, has already asked for Infantino's resignation. That UEFA have come out with a more stronger statement in the last couple of days, asking for, mainly suggesting that his position is in fact basically untenable. But actually, on the flip side, we've had quite a few that have said that they would quite like to keep him, and they are very pleased with how Infantino has operated. Qatar have come out in the last 24 hours and massively supported his work, unsurprising given the level of work that went into the 2022 World Cup, which Infantino naturally had an awful lot of influence over. Equally, one of the other co-host nations, in the form of Mexico, have distanced themselves away from the joint statement that came from the North American Confederation, and maybe not suggesting they felt quite as strongly about this. And Egypt have also praised Infantino for actually cancelling this master plan as well. So there is nations that are clearly listening to Infantino's decision-making and not feeling that this is perhaps quite as strong as we're feeling here in Europe, where this does seem to be an incredibly anti-Infantino establishment. I think it's really important to understand the governance structure of FIFA to really see potentially the influence and where FIFA go with this under Infantino. There are 211 FIFA members that all have an equal share and an equal voting right when dictating decisions made by FIFA. So we could be talking about the DFB, or we could be talking about the English FA. Actually, they have the same power as the likes of Canada or St Kitts and Nevis or Australia or other parts of the globe. And so as a result, their influence, if Infantino is working very closely with Caribbean nations or Sub-Saharan African nations and feeling like he is a good representative for them, they are just as powerful in this decision as other sort of maybe more traditional footballing powers like Germany and England.
And of course, Gianni Infantino is not likely to give give up his position as head of world football without a fight. How difficult would it be to remove him from office early?
So it's not necessarily especially difficult, as there are plenty of governance structures in place for FIFA to review his position. The main one is through an organisation known as the FIFA Council, and they could be asked to call what is effectively an emergency meeting with the other members, asking for Infantino to tender his resignation. These emergency meetings, you need 19 out of 37 votes of the FIFA Council members to make this happen. UEFA have 9 of those members. The AFC, so the Asian Confederacy, have 7. CONCACAF have 5. Now, these are all 3 that have come out with various statements in the last couple of days questioning Infantino's decision-making, and actually that takes us up to 21 votes. Now, of course, that's not to suggest that all of them will follow suit, and we see within sports politics all the time that is not a guarantee in any shape or form, but it does suggest that there are powers in place for these conversations to really take place should others really want them to.
Now, whatever the outcome is of the situation right now, Gianni Infantino still faces re-election next year if he sees this term out. Do you think that he can be successfully re-elected?
I do. I think that Infantino has done an awful lot to contribute to many nations across the globe. There is a real scepticism, I think, across Europe, as we've already discussed. But actually, FIFA's role, realistically, is to try and benefit the world game. And that's not just necessarily looking at it from a Euro perspective. With this, FIFA distribute a lot of good money. And I think it's always important to separate when we talk about FIFA and we talk about Infantino. These are separate organizations. There are lots of people that do fantastic work at in the global federation here that sees real growth across the globe. And nations will rightfully see that. There was a really interesting piece that looked around that came from the head of the Ugandan FA, and he was incredibly supportive of Infantino, just due to the sheer amount of money that has gone into his nation and therefore the development of sport in his country.
Sports economist Adam Davies there, joining us from Manchester in the United Kingdom.